The Meridian wasn't a restaurant so much as a stage for power. Crystal chandeliers poured soft golden light over velvet banquettes, every table an island of whispered deals and clinking crystal. Waiters glided like shadows, their polished shoes making no sound against marble floors. The air itself seemed perfumed with money, truffle butter melting into Wagyu steak, the sharp bite of vintage Bordeaux uncorked just a few minutes too early. Maria Collins adjusted her apron as discreetly as she could, her palms damp. She had served billionaires before, but the man at table 12 was different. Julian Cross didn't just walk into a room, he possessed it. Broad-shouldered in a midnight suit that probably cost more than her yearly rent, he leaned back with the confidence of someone who had never once worried about overdue bills. His steel-gray eyes scanned the room the way a hawk scans a field, not searching, but owning. He drummed 2 fingers against the table. Tap, tap. A gesture that sent his assistant scrambling to refill his glass before a word left his mouth. Maria caught herself holding her breath as she approached. "Your wine, sir," she said softly, presenting the bottle. Julian's gaze flicked over her, cool and dismissive. "Just pour it. And do try not to spill. This isn't the kind of place that forgives mistakes." His voice carried the weight of command, smooth and cutting, like a lawyer's final objection. Maria bit her tongue, tilting the bottle carefully. The stemware chimed faintly, fragile as her composure. She had learned to make herself invisible in this world, eyes down, voice low, movements precise. It was safer that way. But then she saw the woman seated beside Julian. Silver hair pulled neatly back, her posture graceful, her expression quietly alert. Evelyn Cross. There was something different in her eyes, a searching softness that didn't belong in this room of predators. Evelyn's lips moved silently, hands making subtle, elegant gestures under the tablecloth. Julian didn't notice. He never did. He was too busy scanning the menu as if he were appraising stocks. But Maria's chest tightened. She knew those movements. Fingers brushing the air, a flick of the wrist. It wasn't nervous fidgeting. It was American Sign Language. Maria froze for a heartbeat. The safe thing to do would be to pretend she hadn't seen. To nod, to walk away, to vanish back into anonymity. But the woman's hopeful eyes tugged at her, like someone reaching out across a crowded room. Before she could second-guess herself, Maria set the bottle down and signed with steady hands, "Good evening. How may I help you?" The effect was immediate. Evelyn's face lit up, her entire body leaning forward as though a curtain had been drawn back. She replied with practiced fluency, her fingers dancing in gratitude. Julian looked up sharply, wine glass halfway to his lips. What did you just do?" Maria's throat tightened, but she smiled gently, eyes still on Evelyn. "Your mother wanted to compliment the chef on the salmon. She said it reminded her of a dish in Paris." The table stilled. Even the low hum of the restaurant seemed to hush. Julian's gaze pinned her, colder now, laced with something else, curiosity, maybe even suspicion. "She's been trying to get someone's attention for 10 minutes, Maria added, softer. "Most people don't notice." For the first time that evening, Julian Cross didn't look like a man in control. He looked unsettled. And Maria, the invisible waitress, felt the weight of his eyes in a way that told her this night had just shifted onto a new axis. The Meridian was built to remind people of their place. Its walls gleamed with imported marble veined like frozen rivers, its chandeliers sparkled like constellations trapped in crystal. Every sound seemed choreographed, the measured clink of silver cutlery, the low murmur of conversations about mergers, hedge funds, and ski trips to Aspen. Maria moved between tables like a ghost. Her black shoes clicked softly against the polished floor, a rhythm drowned beneath the orchestra of wealth. She balanced trays heavy with foie gras and aged burgundy, all while listening to customers discuss numbers that made her own debts feel microscopic. At table 12, Julian Cross leaned back in his chair, half listening as a board member bragged about crushing a competitor. His expression was smooth, detached, the kind of face that said, "I've heard this story 100 times, and none of them impressed me." He glanced at Maria only when his glass needed refilling, and even then it was as though he were watching a piece of machinery rather than a human being. "Careful with that bottle," he muttered as she approached again. "It costs more than your monthly paycheck." Maria lowered her eyes, lips pressed tight. She wanted to say she knew exactly what the wine cost, down to the vintage year and the vineyard knowledge from the textbooks she once studied at NYU before her world crumbled. But here, she was not Maria the scholar, not Maria the strategist. She was Maria the waitress, and waitresses weren't supposed to know more than the menu. She poured in silence, catching snippets of conversation. 20 million in seed funding, gone overnight. Our lawyer will crush them in arbitration. Aspen this weekend, private chalet, you should join us, Julian. The words floated around her like currency, proof of a world she had once brushed against before being expelled by cruel hands of fate. At the far corner, Evelyn cross-tapped Maria's wrist lightly to get her attention. Maria turned, already anticipating the soft gestures, the quiet language that most people ignored. Evelyn's eyes, gentle and sharp at once, studied her with the kind of interest Maria hadn't felt in years. "You sign beautifully," Evelyn's hand said. "Where did you learn?" Maria hesitated, her fingers faltering in mid-air. Subtext weighed heavy. Telling the truth meant revealing pieces of a past she had buried. "Still," she answered, "I studied linguistics. College. A long time ago." Across the table, Julian's gaze lifted. He caught the last movement of her hands, his brows narrowing. "College?" His tone was casual, but there was iron beneath it. "Which one?" Maria's breath hitched. She smoothed her apron with trembling hands, masking the hesitation with a polite smile. "Just some classes. Nothing important." The words were safe. Invisible words. But Julian's eyes sharpened, the way predators notice when prey moves too quickly. For the first time, Maria realized he wasn't dismissing her anymore, he was calculating. The chandelier's light flickered briefly as if the room itself held its breath. Around them, laughter and deals carried on. But between Julian Cross and Maria Collins, a silent war of curiosity and secrets had already begun. The dinner rush thickened like storm clouds. Waiters hustled through the aisles with trays balanced on fingertips, and the low drone of conversation swelled until it was almost oppressive. Maria steadied herself at table 12, where Julian Cross sat like a king surveying his court. One of his board members, a red-faced man with a voice better suited to a racetrack, laughed loudly at a joke no one else found funny. His elbow clipped a crystal flute, sending champagne spilling across the linen. Maria swooped in with a napkin before the droplets reached Julian's sleeve. "Pathetic service," Julian muttered, not even looking at her. "I shouldn't have to watch my own suit like this." The words weren't just directed at her, they were meant to be heard by everyone at the table. The laughter died into silence. Maria's face burned as she dabbed at the spill, each motion precise, controlled, her pulse hammering in her ears. "You should train your staff better," Julian added coldly to the maitre d', who hovered anxiously nearby. "At these prices, I expect invisibility, not incompetence." Maria's throat tightened. She wanted to snap back, to tell him the champagne was the guest's fault, not hers. But she swallowed the words. Waitresses didn't win arguments here. They disappeared quietly, or they were erased altogether. Still, Evelyn Cross's eyes followed her, soft with sympathy. A mother's gaze that noticed what her son refused to see, the quiet dignity in Maria's silence. Julian tapped his glass once, sharp and deliberate. "Tap. Bring us the special Bordeaux from the reserve cellar. And don't take half an hour about it this time." "Yes, sir." Maria's voice was even, but her fingers trembled around the tray as she walked away. She heard the board member whisper something about help these kids find real jobs, followed by snickers. Her steps echoed in the marble hallway like accusations. Invisible. Disposable. That was her place here, or so they thought. When Maria returned with the Bordeaux, the atmosphere at table 12 had softened. Evelyn Cross had been attempting conversation, her hands moving in elegant phrases no one seemed to understand. Her son didn't even glance at her gestures, his eyes were fixed on the glowing screen of his phone. Maria placed the bottle carefully on the table, her posture calm, though her chest still burned from the humiliation. Then she caught Evelyn's movement, a request, quiet but insistent, fingers tracing the air for someone who could understand. Without thinking, Maria answered with her hands. "Would you like me to pour you a glass, Mrs. Cross?" Evelyn's entire face brightened, as if someone had opened a window in a darkened room. She replied quickly, "Yes, please. It's rare anyone here knows how to speak with me." Maria smiled. "It's my honor," she said aloud, translating for the others, then poured with steady grace. Julian's head jerked up, his phone forgotten. You can sign?" Maria's eyes flicked to him, steady for once. "Yes, sir. Your mother was asking for the wine. She also complimented the chef earlier. The salmon reminded her of Paris." A ripple of surprise spread around the table. Board members exchanged glances, impressed despite themselves. Evelyn chuckled silently, her hands moving again. "You're very kind. And brave. My son doesn't notice details like this." Maria translated only part of it, leaving the sharper edge unsaid. Subtext filled the air like static. Julian's gaze sharpened on her, colder, calculating now, not dismissive, not mocking, but interested in a way that made Maria's stomach knot. He leaned forward slightly, voice low. "Where did you learn sign language?" Maria hesitated, every nerve screaming to hide. "College," she said carefully. "A long time ago." Julian's eyes narrowed. "Which one?" The question was simple, but the way he asked it made it feel like a trap. Maria forced a smile, bowing her head. "Just classes here and there. Nothing important." But her hands, still resting on the bottle, betrayed the steadiness of someone who had studied hard, someone who knew more than she was willing to admit. Evelyn's knowing smile confirmed it. For the first time all evening, Maria wasn't just invisible background. She was a puzzle, and Julian Cross hated puzzles he couldn't solve. The Bordeaux gleamed in the crystal glasses like liquid ruby. The table buzzed again with conversation, numbers and forecasts thrown around as if billions were small change. Julian Cross swirled his wine, studying Maria with that same hawk's gaze. He had moved from dismissive to intrigued, and intrigued was far more dangerous. "So," he said, almost casually. "College." He let the word dangle like bait on a hook. "Tell me, Maria, did they teach you how to handle market volatility in between serving salmon?" The men around him chuckled, a low chorus of agreement. Maria kept her face neutral, though her stomach tightened. She should have walked away, nodded politely, let the insult pass like every other. But Evelyn's eyes caught hers, gentle, encouraging, as though urging her to hold her ground. Julian leaned forward, voice carrying enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "All right then. Let's see if you're more than a waitress with a party trick. Imagine this, a competitor undercuts your product by 30% overnight. What do you do?" The board members smirked, expecting silence. Maria inhaled slowly, the clink of forks and the murmur of music sharpening in her ears. The safe answer would be to apologize, to retreat into invisibility. But something in her, something she had buried under months of folded napkins and balancing trays, stirred awake. She set the bottle down, lifted her chin slightly, and answered. "You evaluate elasticity. If your product's demand is price sensitive, you find leverage elsewhere, brand prestige, exclusivity, or bundled services. If not, you hold. Cutting price isn't strategy. It's panic." The table stilled. One of the executives scoffed nervously. "And what would you know about market elasticity?" Maria met his gaze, calm and steady. "Enough to know that panic destroys more companies than competition." Julian's glass paused midair. For a flicker of a second, his smirk faltered. The hawk had spotted something unexpected, a mouse that fought back with teeth. Evelyn laughed silently, her hands moving. "I like her." Maria pretended not to notice, but heat crept up her neck. Around them, the air was electric, the invisible waitress suddenly transformed into the center of gravity. Julian finally leaned back, lips curling into the faintest smile. Not bad. For a waitress. The words were sharp, but softer than before, laced with something dangerous, respect. That night, Maria walked home through the dim streets of Queens, the city's neon glow reflecting off puddles at her feet. Her tiny apartment smelled faintly of coffee and laundry detergent, a world away from the perfumed grandeur of the Meridian. She tossed her apron onto the counter, her body heavy but her mind restless. Julian's question echoed in her head: which college? She hadn't lied. She had been there. She had been someone else once. Her fingers brushed the drawer of her desk, the one she rarely opened. Slowly, she pulled it out. Inside lay fragments of a life she no longer claimed, an NYU student ID with her younger face smiling confidently, a half-finished thesis proposal, and, beneath them, a patent filing draft with her name scratched out and replaced by another. Victor Kane. Her stomach clenched at the sight of it. The man who had once promised to build a future with her had stolen everything: her work, her recognition, her dream. She had dropped out not because she wasn't good enough, but because fighting him would have taken money she didn't have. Now her brilliance existed only in whispered theories in her head, hidden behind trays and table numbers. She sat at the desk, the hum of the city filtering through the window, and pressed her palm against the old documents. Her throat burned with words unsaid, years stolen. Back at the Meridian, Julian Cross believed he had tested her tonight. But he didn't know that Maria Collins wasn't a random waitress with clever words. She was the ghost of an idea that once threatened to change the industry he ruled. And ghosts never stayed buried forever. Julian Cross never left questions unanswered. By the next morning, his office windows framed the Manhattan skyline like a throne room, but his eyes weren't on the view. They were on the dossier spread across his desk. Maria Collins, he murmured, tapping a finger against the folder. Queen's address. Waitress. No debts, no credit cards. Nothing unusual. Except there was. Julian's investigator, a lean man in a dark suit, cleared his throat. Sir, she wasn't always a waitress. Collins was enrolled at NYU's Stern School of Business. Top of her class. Specializing in financial modeling. Julian's gaze sharpened. Why'd she leave? The man hesitated. Officially? Family hardship. Unofficially? Her research paper disappeared. A draft she co-authored on predictive algorithms. 6 months later, a similar model surfaced under the name of Victor Kane. Julian's lips curled, half amusement, half disdain. Of course. He leaned back in his leather chair, the city buzzing below like an obedient machine. Victor Kane, his rival, had been circling Cross Industries for years like a vulture waiting for scraps. If Maria Collins had been the original mind behind Kane's golden weapon, then the quiet waitress wasn't just an anomaly. She was leverage. He glanced at the window, his reflection merging with the towers beyond. A waitress with stolen brilliance. And she served me wine as if she were invisible. Julian smirked. Not invisible anymore. He closed the folder with a snap. Tomorrow, he decided, Maria Collins would step into his world again, only this time, she wouldn't leave it unscathed. The Cross Industries headquarters rose above Manhattan like a glass cathedral, its walls reflecting both sky and ambition. Maria had never been inside, but when the invitation arrived, delivered not by email, but by a sleek black town car waiting outside her apartment, she knew refusing wasn't an option. Now, standing in the lobby with marble underfoot and a sculpture worth more than her old apartment rent spinning slowly in the atrium, she felt the familiar weight of being out of place. Waitresses didn't belong here. But then again, neither did ghosts, and she had become one long ago. A receptionist guided her to the top floor, where floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the boardroom with hard morning light. The city stretched beneath like a conquered empire. At the head of the table sat Julian Cross, surrounded by his directors, each one draped in tailored suits and polished disdain. Miss Collins, Julian said smoothly as she entered, gesturing to the empty chair at his right. His voice was polite, but it was a politeness that cut deeper than cruelty. You impressed me last night. Let's see if it was luck or substance. Maria's pulse thundered as she sat, every eye in the room drilling into her. Papers rustled, laptops clicked open, the air taut with skepticism. One director, a sharp-nosed man with silver hair, sneered openly. "She's a waitress, Julian. Is this a joke?" Julian didn't answer. Instead, he slid a set of financial reports toward Maria. Charts, numbers, projections, an entire company's future sprawled before her. "This," Julian said, his tone crisp, "is the expansion plan our competitor Victor Kane has been parading as his masterpiece. I want you to tell me where the cracks are." Gasps rippled down the table. A trap, clearly. No waitress could possibly read the data, much less dismantle it. Maria stared at the papers, her throat dry. She could walk out now, save herself the humiliation. Or she could do the thing she had sworn never to do again, step back into the light of her old brilliance. She chose the latter. Her finger traced a chart. "Here," she began, her voice steady, "the numbers project exponential growth, but the base assumption is flawed. Kane's algorithm underestimates volatility in emerging markets. It's not growth, it's a bubble waiting to collapse." Silence fell. The directors leaned in, suddenly alert. Maria continued, her words gaining strength with every correction, every exposure of Kane's sleight of hand. The air grew charged, disbelief shifting into grudging awe. Julian's lips curved into the faintest smile, eyes locked on her like a man who had just discovered gold buried under his own floor. By the time she finished, even the sharp-nosed director had no retort. The room felt different now. Maria wasn't a waitress here. She was the storm that cracked open the sky. Julian leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice smooth as velvet, "I think we've underestimated our guest." His gaze lingered on Maria, sharp and calculating. "And I, for one, do not like underestimating people." The boardroom air, once hostile, now simmered with unease. Power had shifted and everyone felt it. The applause had barely faded when the boardroom door swung open. No knock, no warning, just the heavy thud of power forcing its way inside. Victor Kane stepped in like he owned the place. His suit was darker than midnight, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. The directors straightened instinctively, some shifting with unease, others with thinly veiled admiration. Victor thrived on this kind of entrance. "Julian," he drawled, spreading his arms as though the room were his stage. "Still wasting time on parlor tricks?" His eyes flicked to Maria, and for a moment, the mask slipped. A flicker of recognition. Then delight. Well, he purred. "Maria Collins. I never thought I'd see you outside the shadows. Serving wine suits you, but this," he gestured at the reports in front of her, "this is adorable." Maria's blood ran cold. Her spine stiffened, but she kept her hands flat on the table to stop them from trembling. Julian's gaze sharpened. "You know her?" Victor chuckled, pacing like a predator. "Know her? I made her. Once upon a time, Maria believed she could change the industry. She had ideas. Raw, unpolished. She needed someone with real vision to shape them. So I did. And when the pressure got too much, well, she broke. Dropped out. Vanished." Gasps echoed around the table. Maria felt the sting of their stares, the judgment settling like shackles around her neck. She wanted to shout the truth that he stole her work, twisted it into the weapon now being wielded against Cross Industries. But the words lodged in her throat, heavy as stones. Victor leaned closer, voice low but carrying. "Tell me, Maria. Do they know about your failed patent application? About the lawsuit you couldn't afford to fight? About the night you begged me not to leave you behind?" Her breath caught. The air smelled of polished oak and expensive cologne, but beneath it she swore she could still taste the bitterness of that night when she had realized he was not her partner, but her thief. Julian's eyes never left her, unreadable but burning. Around them, the directors shifted, whispers rising like smoke. Victor straightened, basking in the discomfort he had unleashed. "Gentlemen, if this is Julian's new strategy, recruiting dropouts and failures, then I'd say Cross Industries is closer to collapse than we thought." Laughter, cruel and sharp, rippled through half the table. Maria's chest ached, every word like salt in wounds she thought had scarred over. She stared at her trembling hands, fighting the urge to run. But then Evelyn Cross's voice broke through, not spoken, but signed across the table, her hands steady and deliberate. "Don't let him steal your voice again." Maria blinked, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. She swallowed hard, the roar of humiliation in her ears quieting into something else. Resolve. Victor's grin widened, sensing victory. "Cat got your tongue, Maria?" She lifted her head slowly, meeting his gaze with eyes that no longer flinched. "No," she said softly, her voice steady now. "Not anymore." The room stilled. For the first time, Victor Kane faltered. The silence that followed Maria's quiet defiance felt heavier than the skyscraper itself. The boardroom was no longer a place of strategy, it was an arena, and every eye was fixed on the unlikely combatants. Victor Kane leaned back, his grin curling wider, but there was something brittle in his eyes. He expected Maria to crumble. To retreat. To vanish as she had before. But before she could respond further, Julian Cross rose from his chair. The scrape of leather against polished wood was sharp, commanding. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. The room quieted as if Manhattan itself had paused to listen. "That's enough," Julian said. His words were smooth, but under them was steel. "You've had your performance, Victor. Now it's my turn." Victor's smirk faltered. "Defending a waitress, Julian? That's beneath you." Julian's eyes narrowed. "No. What's beneath me is watching a thief strut into my boardroom and call himself a visionary." Gasps broke across the table. The directors exchanged stunned glances. Maria blinked, hardly daring to breathe. Julian paced slowly, hands clasped behind his back. "Maria Collins is not a dropout. She's not a failure. She's the one who saw through your so-called expansion plan in under 10 minutes, something this entire board of seasoned executives failed to do in 6 months." The sting of his words landed hard. Several directors shifted uncomfortably, shame painting their faces. Julian stopped beside Maria's chair, resting one hand lightly on the table near her. Not touching her, but close enough to draw a line. "She is with me. You want to laugh at her?" Julian continued, voice low and dangerous. "Then you laugh at me. Because I'm betting Cross Industries on her insight. If you doubt her, you doubt me." Victor's jaw clenched, his smug mask slipping for the first time. "You're making a mistake, Julian. She'll drag you down." Julian leaned in just slightly, his eyes hard as glass. "I don't make mistakes. I make choices. And I choose her." The words landed like a thunderclap. Maria's chest tightened, her throat thick with emotion she couldn't show. For months, years even, she had been invisible. Disposable. And now the most powerful man in the room had just staked his empire on her. The directors whispered in a storm of disbelief and unease, but none dared speak against Julian. His authority was absolute. Victor glared, his fists tightening. "This isn't over." Julian straightened, his gaze cold. "It never is. But Maria will be standing here the next time you try, and you'll regret underestimating her." For the first time in years, Maria felt the weight of humiliation lift. Replaced by something terrifying, exhilarating, recognition. The boardroom lights seemed harsher now, cutting across polished wood and glass like spotlights on a stage. Maria stood at the far end of the table, the reports spread before her like weapons. Across from her, Victor Kane leaned back, exuding confidence that was starting to fray at the edges. Julian sat silent, his arms crossed, letting the room breathe. He had already chosen his side. Now it was Maria's turn to prove that choice wasn't madness. Victor smirked. "Go on then, Maria. Show them how a dropout with nothing left can embarrass herself in front of the city's most powerful board." Her hands trembled only for a moment. Then she pressed her palms flat on the table, grounding herself. The marble was cold, solid. She lifted her chin. "Fine. Let's talk about your numbers." The directors leaned in. The hum of the city below seemed to fade until only Maria's voice filled the space. She flipped through Victor's glossy reports, page after page of projections dressed up like gospel. "Here," she said, tapping one chart. "Your algorithm assumes a stable inflation rate in Brazil. But the central bank raised rates 3 times in the last quarter. Your growth curve isn't growth, it's fiction. Victor's smile faltered, just slightly. Maria moved to another page. And here your cost analysis ignores currency volatility in Southeast Asia. You've projected profits that don't exist. In reality, you're building a tower on sand. Murmurs spread across the board. One director scribbled notes furiously, another looked up in alarm. Victor barked a laugh, but it rang hollow. Anyone can nitpick numbers. That doesn't make you right. Maria straightened, her voice sharper now. No, Victor. What makes me right is that you stole the model you're parading as your own. And you didn't even understand it well enough to see its flaws. The room froze. Julian's eyes glittered with satisfaction. Evelyn Cross, sitting quietly in the corner, smiled faintly, her hand signing a single word, truth. Victor shot up from his chair, his composure cracking. Lies. She has no proof. Maria reached into her bag. For weeks she had carried it without knowing why, the single relic of her past she could never throw away, the original draft of her patent filing, time-stamped, her name in black and white. She laid it on the table, sliding it across the polished surface until it stopped in front of Victor. Proof enough? She asked. The directors swarmed the document, eyes widening as realization struck. Gasps, whispers, disbelief. One finally turned to Julian. This changes everything. Victor's face burned crimson. He opened his mouth to protest, but no words came. The room was no longer his. Maria's heart pounded, but her voice was steady as stone. You stole my work once, Victor. But you don't get to steal my voice again. The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't weakness anymore that filled the room, it was power, and it was hers. Julian rose, clapping once, slow and deliberate. Gentlemen, he said smoothly, I believe the matter is settled. Cross Industries is not in the hands of a thief. It's in the hands of the woman who exposed him. Victor's fury boiled in his eyes, but he had nothing left. He gathered his papers with trembling hands and stormed out, the doors slamming like a final gavel. For the first time in years, Maria wasn't invisible. She was undeniable. The boardroom was still buzzing when Maria stepped outside into the crisp Manhattan air. The city roared around her, horns blaring, footsteps rushing, neon lights pulsing against the glass towers. But inside her chest, there was silence. A rare, steady silence that came only when the storm had finally broken. She looked down at her hands, the same hands that had balanced trays, poured wine, wiped spills in silence. Tonight those hands had dismantled a thief's empire. Tonight, they had signed her name back into existence. Julian followed her out, his coat draped casually over one arm, his expression unreadable. For once, his commanding posture had softened, just slightly. You realize, he said, his voice carrying the weight of both warning and admiration, you just declared war on Victor Kane. He won't forgive this. Maria exhaled, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. He already took everything from me once. There's nothing left to lose. Julian tilted his head, studying her. Then, slowly, he smiled, a rare, genuine smile that stripped away the armor. You're wrong. You've got everything to gain. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder, thinner than Victor's bloated reports but far more valuable. He handed it to her. Your patent, Julian said. Reinstated under your name. I made a few calls after our conversation yesterday. Consider this a start. Maria's throat tightened. She opened the folder, and there it was, her work, her vision, finally reclaimed. Her fingers trembled as she traced the letters of her own name, no longer erased. What do you want from me? She asked, half afraid of the answer. Julian chuckled softly, his gaze fixed on the skyline. Nothing you're not already capable of. Build. Lead. Prove that brilliance doesn't need $1 billion suit to matter. The night wind swept between them, carrying the scent of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor, the sound of jazz drifting faintly from a corner bar. Maria breathed it all in. For the first time, the city didn't feel like it was pressing her down. It felt like it was waiting for her. Weeks later, the headlines would call her the waitress who became a visionary CEO. Venture capitalists would chase her, Journalists would romanticize her rise, and cross-industries would form a historic partnership with her new startup. But in this moment, standing under the glittering towers of Manhattan, Maria Collins wasn't thinking of headlines or deals. She was thinking of her mother's old words, whispered on nights when the world felt impossible: "Don't let anyone write your story for you." Maria smiled faintly, clutching the folder to her chest. For the first time in years, her story was hers again. And this time, she was just getting started. In the end, Maria's story reminds us of something timeless: success isn't written in a job title, a bank account, or the suit you wear. True value lies in resilience, in the courage to stand tall even when the world tries to shrink you. She wasn't just a waitress, she was a visionary hiding in plain sight. And when the moment came, she proved that talent and hard work can shine brighter than arrogance and money. This is the American dream at its core, the belief that no matter where you start, your grit and your gifts can carry you to places you never imagined. And it's a reminder for all of us: never underestimate someone based on their uniform, their paycheck, or their silence. You never know what brilliance is waiting beneath the surface. What about you? If you were in Maria's shoes, would you have found the courage to speak up? Share your thoughts in the comments, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and may your journey always lead you toward light, courage, and hope.